Welcome to the show today. Today I
Good
have
morning. Thank you, Daniel.
Shubhang. Hi. Today I have Shubhang Shankar on the show, and he's a managing director at Syngenta Ventures. And I'm very, very excited to talk to you today. Talk a little bit about your story, your background, what drives you, the passion behind things, and some of the lessons learned along the way. So thank you for being on the show.
Thank you, Daniel. My pleasure. And hello to everyone who's watching.
So let's dive right into your story. Tell me a bit more about who you are and where you come from, and basically a little bit about the story that got you to where you are today.
Okay. That's a long, complicated question. So let me try and start with it. So, I'm originally from India. I was born and brought up in New Delhi, the capital city of the country. At 20 million people, it has more people than quite a few, European countries. So it was a very, very different and very interesting experience growing up in Delhi, especially in the early 90s when India was undergoing a lot of changes. I was, a good student pretty much all through my career. I did my engineering from the Indian Institute of Technology in Delhi. And then I went straight to do an MBA, which is the standard Indian route for, engineers. Once they're done with their engineering, they go and do an MBA. So I did 2 years in management education from the Indian Institute of Ahmedabad, and then subsequently I started my career in consulting. It was again a very, very natural path for us, especially in the mid 2000s. You either went into banking or you went into consulting, or perhaps you went into marketing. And it was said that if you don't know what you want to do, you might as well start off with consulting, because you will get multiple experiences. You'd have a new client situation every 6 months to 1 year. And I have to say that did hold true. I mean, I liked consulting well enough to stay there for 8 years. 8 years of a lot of fun, had a lot of learning. Split across two firms. So I started my career, as I mentioned, with the AT Kearney, and then I moved to the Boston Consulting Group, BCG, for the last 2 years. Grew up through the ranks. Started off as an analyst, then became an associate, and then final position was engagement manager or a project leader. um, Worked across multiple sectors, multiple industries, primarily doing strategy for either oil and gas or electricity or chemicals clients. So real, old industry sectors, but fascinating to work in. Led small teams to do small strategy engagements, led large teams to do organizational engagements, productivity engagements. I mean, I really, think I got a lot out of my consulting career in terms of variety. Got married, and then, had a family, and at one point realized that consulting is a fantastic career, but it does take a lot of toll on your personal life, especially with the amount of travel and the long hours involved. And I think you can do that for a few years when you don't have too many commitments, but more than commitments, I really felt that I was missing my family life, especially in the first few years that my son was born. So I made the decision that, look, I have done consulting for 8 years. Let's try something new. They were When I was evaluating what to do, and I was still based in India all through this time, I felt that I'm missing a couple of things in my career. Firstly, uh, you know, when when I look back at my consulting career, all the senior clients that I admired were people who had long stints with international companies, large international well-known companies. And I figured it was because these companies, they do invest a lot and give you a lot of good training and a lot of good experiences, which you can leverage later on in your career, either with the same company or somewhere else. So I wanted to work for a large international company. I had studied and lived and worked in India for the first 32 years of my life. So I said, I miss international experience. So I wanted to work in an international setting, especially because I was at that time in a stage of my personal life where we were still mobile. When children become older, it becomes much harder to move. And the third thing was, I wanted to stick to one of the sectors that I knew very well. So I was targeting oil and gas or chemicals or process industries. So, and the one good thing I think about consulting firms is they help you at all stages of your career, even when you do not want to work in consulting anymore. So I was lucky to be able to use the BCG network to come across, an opening in the strategy team of Syngenta here in Basel. Applied, got through the first few rounds, and then Syngenta brought me here for a day of face-to-face interviews. And I just had a fantastic experience working, not working, but interacting with the team that I would be working with the lady who would be my boss, Dr. Katia Fechler. And I just, like the feel of the company. It's hard to explain, but it was a very international environment, seemed very friendly, seemed quite, full of people who were passionate and committed. So when Syngenta made me an offer, it was quite an easy decision to say yes to this. So yeah, that's a little bit of how I got where I am, and it's been 5 fantastic years in Switzerland with Syngenta. So
Thanks for
that's a
sharing.
little bit.
I really appreciate it. Really appreciate it. You talked about a lot of things very passionately, and I want to dive a lot more into that. I mean, you had a very different experience in your career, from the world of investments now to the consulting world, to your studies, and I just want to better understand, like, what is sort of like the driving force for you, like, if you look at your, maybe we can focus on the work that you're doing right now, or on the environment you're in right now, like, what is it that motivates you most, that really drives you the most to get up every morning and do the work you do?
That's a great question, and I think everybody, when they self reflect, they have their own biases. So I'm not sure if that is, if what I say is going to be the right answer, but it is my answer. And I think all through my career, whenever I felt highly motivated, the common thread has been that I enjoyed the intellectual challenge of learning. I think learning is something, and learning something new is always something that has appealed to me in my, not just as a student but also in my professional life. So some people like continuously getting good at what they're doing, and they just want to improve, and I very much respect that. But for me, I always had a mind that was going in multiple directions in at once. And while that is not suitable in many situations in life, at least in my career, I have always found it to be of help. So in consulting, it was always about getting to know lots of pieces of a business problem or an industry in some depth very quickly. That appealed. And what I'm doing right now, Syngenta is a company which operates at a scale where I think nobody can ever have in-depth knowledge of each and every aspect of it. So the fact that I get exposure to different problems, both when I was in the strategy team, but even more so now in the ventures team, I think that's fantastic. So uh, you know as part of my ventures career, I've been very lucky to have been given substantial autonomy by my supervisors. And yeah, I mean, one day I could be evaluating a fintech company in southeastern Europe. The next day I could be looking at a technology company out of Denmark. So the breadth of experiences has always kept me motivated, and that's something that I continue to enjoy.
That's really interesting. I mean, looking back, looking at your career, consulting, and now in the investment, in the ventures business, basically, obviously is a great fit for that, I guess, diversity, or learning something new, or looking at different things, and not just like going very deep into one thing. It's a great match. It's great alignment. So it's great. I'm always inspired to hear how people's passions and sort of like motivation aligns with their actual work, with their actual careers. And it's interesting, because sometimes there's great alignment, sometimes there's really not that great of alignment. And what I love is that pretty much there's pretty much something for everyone in that sense. but it's about the awareness of understanding and knowing yourself quite well that gives you the opportunity to actually align your outside world or the world around you with that, with that inner drive. So I love that. I love that you shared this. Now I want to talk a little bit about the journey that you had, from consulting to ventures, basically, and talk a little bit about lessons learned along the way and some of the context of these lessons. Maybe we can pick one or two to go a little bit more into depth. So can you share like one specific lesson that you feel was really important to you to learn along the way, and what was sort of like the context around it?
Right. So, and as you said, there are multiple lessons. I think, in every career you make mistakes and you learn a lot of lessons. I think one of the biggest lessons in my professional career that I learned, and I learned the hard way, was the importance of communication. And when you're a student, especially when you're an engineering student out of India, your innate bias is always to be analytical and keep a problem, keep going at a problem yourself till the time you have a solution. Very often not ask for help because it could be seen as a sign of weakness, and you're not supposed to display signs of weakness, or it could be seen as a shortcoming. So I think for the first many years of my career, and I think this is not unique to me, I did not understand the importance of communication, and communication in the context of organizations. Organizations can be big, can be small. They could frankly be even teams of 2 to 3 people, but communication is always important to ensure alignment, to ensure a good working relationship, to ensure that you identify and address issues as and when they arise. So I think what I have done in the last 3 years, and this happened in fact a lot more when I moved into venturing, was I became a lot more open with my communication at frankly every stage of my career. So I communicate a lot more internally. I ask for help from my team, my colleagues. I communicate a lot more with the people that I meet, the entrepreneurs, the startups. I communicate with their teams. I put my point of view across, and then I engage in conversations. And I think that was my biggest learning, that in a career, in ventures, in consulting, or frankly in any corporate career, it's not about knowing the right answer, because nobody has the depth to know the right answers to all the problems that you could have. It's about arriving at the right answer, and you cannot arrive at it alone, and you cannot arrive at it without communicating. So that was my biggest lesson.
That's a really, really big one, especially the specific aspect of communication I feel that you mentioned, which is asking for help. Because and I don't think it's like, it's maybe in some cultures it may be a bigger challenge than in others, but I think it's a human thing,
Mm,
that asking for help, the reflection of being weak. I think that's a really interesting one because, I sort of like, oh, it's so logical actually when you say it or when you think about it, but the easiest way to get something is actually to ask for it, right? Or the most
exactly.
logical way to get something is actually to ask for it, right? But if you hold back from asking, that just keeps a lot of doors closed for us, very
Exactly.
often.
Yeah.
But if we step up and actually look at asking not as a way of showing weakness, but actually as a way of showing strength, because let's be honest, asking for something actually does require strength, because you
Yes.
got to get over yourself in order to actually do it. So once you actually do it and ask for help, you actually show strength. And in my experience, I've been practicing this a lot over the past couple of years, just basically asking for what I want, like very upfront and very direct. And it's very often quite magical. And I think one of the reasons is because the majority of people simply don't do it. And
Yeah.
but what I've also seen is the reception of the ask is very often very positive. Pretty much always, it's very
Yes.
positive. People actually are very happy if they get asked for asked, but for specific things and not like generic, stuff, but specifically for things that you actually want. Because I don't know exactly why, but I feel like there's a lot of it's very powerful to ask something and know what you want. I guess it actually does come over as strong, interestingly, even though we perceive it as being weak sometimes.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one. So one of the things I also want to talk about with you is teams, teams, organizations, and I want to look at it from your perspective of ventures, because you look at these ventures now all day long, right? You look at companies, you look at organizations, you look at teams, you look at ideas, of course, as well. And I'm really interested in understanding, based on your experience over the past 5 years in that world, where or which aspects, when you look at an organization or a startup, basically, or whatever, as an investment, right? What are some of the key criterias, sort of like beyond the most logical things, like the just the pure data? What are some of the most important factors for you to make a positive decision beyond the pure just raw data?
Got it. Yeah. And let me I will answer that. Let me put a frame around this. I think venturing is a little bit beyond, or a little different from investing in other segments, because frankly there is not much data available most often, because you're taking a bet that a market will come, or a customers will come, or a need exists which is not getting served, hence there is no data. So in some ways we make investment decisions in a data poor, surprisingly data poor environment, which is quite different from let's say private equity, where you're investing in established companies and you have years and years of financials going back. So in that sense, I think venturing is a lot of judgment rather than analytical news, which is not to say there is no analysis. You need to come up with a judgment based on inferences, based on facts. But it's not it. I don't think it is a it is can be represented as an algorithm. Having said that, I think, and I've done some reading about the origins of venture capital as an industry, and based on what I see and what I read, there are three main things that drive a venture capital investment. You could either invest in the belief that there is a market, or that there will be a market. You could invest in a specific person or team. So you believe that this entrepreneur will make something happen, or you invest in a specific product or a technology, or in some cases even an app. So that's the holy trinity of venture capital investing. And I think individuals will have different biases towards one of these three vertices of the triangle. Some venture capitalists are much more driven by the team, and they believe that, look, I just want to invest in the right entrepreneur, and they will figure out what the market, and they will make all the necessary changes. Some others say, look, I need to see evidence that there is a market, because technologies or good ideas can remain dormant as long as there is no market. So you can be successful with any style, frankly. My own personal style, and I'll come to that. I'm a great believer in the market. And by market, I don't really just mean transactions and market sizes. I want to know if there is a real problem for a large enough number of customers, that you will be able to build a viable business around here. um, m- I have an interest in learning about history, and and I've read quite widely about the history of technology. And one of the things that always struck me was the idea that technology can remain dormant for decades, and frankly years, centuries as well, if the right market conditions don't exist. And the best example of that, without getting into the details, is the steam engine. Steam technology was known to the Greeks. There were no real big scientific breakthroughs between the time of the Greeks to the time of the Industrial Revolution, which made steam engine possible. What changed was the social and economic environment. So you have a technology that remained dormant for about 1500 years till a market suddenly appeared. So for me, I really need to know that the problem that you're solving is a really big problem for a lot of people. That's one. I also think, the team cannot be discounted. I mean, you have to uh, take a view on the entrepreneur, not just on their capabilities as an individual or as a scientist or as a businessman, but also their interpersonal skills. Because you can never invest in a single person. You always invest in a team. So that entrepreneur has to be able to build a strong team. He or she needs to be able to work with partners, work with customers. So all of that requires a lot of interpersonal skills, team building skills, determination, tenacity. Entrepreneurship is not easy, and if it was, then we'd have many more people doing it. We'd have many more people succeeding at it. So there is definitely an entrepreneur's mindset. So I think both of these are extremely important. And the last thing you mentioned about team building, I don't think it can be emphasized enough. Teams succeed, not individuals.
I love the Holy Trinity. It's really interesting. I mean, I read a lot about venture capital, and I know quite a few people, but I never looked at it like in a such a structured way. So it's a really interesting insight. What I want to better understand, because I'm super curious about that, the market piece. So, talking about the market, example of the steam engine, and that's always the same thing. Like, when you look back, it's easy, right? It's
Yeah,
obvious, of
it's
course, right?
obvious. Yeah.
But if you look forward, there's nothing obvious, right? Because you can't look forward really. So how do you know if a market is actually there or could be there?
I think the simple answer to that is you can never know whether a market is there. A lot of it is, faith-based investing. It's a belief that, a market will come or demand exists. You can do some sample tests. You can speak to customers. You can, put your mind around a problem. You can ask yourself, what would I do if I was in this situation, in a customer situation? Would I want this product? You can ask your friends and family and all of that. But all of this is at the end of the day, judgment and faith in some ways. So I think we can never ever get away from the fact that probably venture capital can never be distilled into a set of scientific principles that do X, Y, Z, and you will have a good investment in your hand. And frankly, venture capital is the only industry I know, and the only investing space I know where the base case expectation is that 70% of the companies in your portfolio will fail, two will perhaps do reasonably well, and one will be stellar. And that's you invest in search of that. So I think, you know to answer your question, how do you believe that a market will be there? um, I think you have to just speak to customers. I mean, when I look at startups, and in some ways we are a little bit better because we invest at slightly later stages, not at pure concept stage, but early commercialization stage. So we one of the things I invest a lot of time in is talking to customers of of the specific startup, and just understanding, how valuable is this for a customer. And it's not often easy because the best customers of a startup will say obviously that they need it, but do they really mean it? If push comes to shove, will they pay for it? How much will they pay for it? And what proportion of people would pay for it? I think those are very, very difficult questions, because startups very often say that they don't compete with anybody, but even non-consumption of a product or a service is a competitor. So for me, I almost never ask the question, what does the customer gain by using this specific startup service or product? I ask what would they lose if they don't use it. And if the loss does not seem overwhelming, then I really question whether a market will come up. So that, I think, is about as analytical I can get about how to identify when a market exists.
I mean, I really like that piece. I mean, obviously, I mean, it's very different from highly analytical investing.
Mhm.
Um, and to me, that's what makes it really fascinating, because there there are so many unknowns, and we
Yes.
have no way of quantifying emotional judgments and things like that. It's just, you can't put it in a spreadsheet. It just doesn't work.
Yeah.
Even if you try, it's still completely flawed.
Exactly.
Because we just have no way of doing that as human beings. That's really fascinating. And the other thing that's really fascinating to me is the way of looking um, the benefits of a customer upside down. It's not about, what's the benefit of using that, what are the tangible and the emotion, whatever, but looking at it from the other side. If they don't make a change, if they don't use the service, if they use something else instead, what's the actual, what's the actual pain? What's the actual pain then? What's the actual pain of not using it? I really like that. That's a really interesting way, because you look at the flip side basically. And I
Hmm.
think very few people do actually look at the flip side. Um,
Hmm.
when we look at pain, it's usually on the other side, which is like, what pain are we solving? But
Yeah.
we're not really looking at what pain are we getting by not using this. What pain are we having with still using taxis versus Uber?
Yeah. And I think the question is, are you live as a customer, are you willing to live with that level of pain? Frankly, some are, because the cost benefit does not justify making that change. And you will never hear that articulated, but that's where I think the judgment piece comes in.
It's fascinating. It just reminded me of online shopping, like a very basic example right now, and especially right now,
Yep.
in these times, right? So it's really interesting because online shopping isn't new, right? And a lot of people, at least in Switzerland, I think, because maybe we're a very traditional country, but a lot of people are not, and me included, are not really very savvy with online shopping, except
Hmm.
for
Hmm.
like gadgets, but not for food or something like that. um, and I find it interesting that the you know the benefits, if you just put it on a spreadsheet, you know the benefits are great. They're amazing. With all the free delivery and whatever. I mean, it's amazing. But that alone is never really enough, because if you look at the flip side that you mentioned, which is what is the pain of not switching. Well, it may look, actually, okay, it's more painful to go offline shopping, but there's a lot of I believe, like, benefits that come from it that you would never consciously mention, or
Hmm.
talk about. Just getting some fresh air, going for a walk, has nothing to do with shopping at the end of the day, right? Or meeting friends or whatever. So it's a really fascinating way of looking at it, simply said. So
Absolutely.
there's one more question I have to you, which is, many years fast forward. You're 80 years old, you're sitting in your rocking chair, and you're looking back at your life, and you're looking back at the journey the world has traveled over those past many years. Looking back in that moment, what is a change that you would want to see, either in the world in general, in the business world, or something else?
So let me answer, in terms of the level of change that I would like to see in the world. And I think I'm naturally attracted to the question because venture capital, in some ways, is an anarchic activity. It's all about building something new, not settling for what exists. So what could be more interesting than making a wish for what the world is? And based on my experiences growing up, on my professional experience, my personal experiences, having lived in two countries, two cultures, I let me not hold myself back. So I'm going to make an outrageous wish. I wish that when I turn 80, um, there would be a more even distribution of opportunity in the world. I think in today's world, where you are born, what gender you are born, um, all of that still makes a significant impact on your life journey. And we may not know it, we may not feel it, but it is there. I think that's one aspect of the world which um, may strike some people as unfair and may strike some people differently, but I think it definitely exists. So my wish would be that, opportunity should become more democratized and be more widely available to people, across the world. They should have the means, and this could be any kind of means: technological, social, political, environmental, to get the maximum out of their life. I think we in some ways are fortunate, you and I, that we are able to have a chat about this. But there are many, who knows how many talented people are there who are being held back because of not having access to opportunity. So that would be my outrageously optimistic wish.
I love that. I love that very much. And I really do love that as well, very much, because, it's coming from somebody who's grown up in a very different culture than me, So, I have a lot of difficulty putting myself in those shoes. Because, I'm very, I believe everybody's designed by their environment pretty much, by their culture, by their parents, by whatever, wherever they are. So it's a beautiful wish, and it's a beautiful world to imagine and to create. And I just thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate it. All your insights, sharing your story, sharing your inputs on venture capital, and the kind of like journey you're on. And we're going to link below this video to some of the sources like your LinkedIn profile, so people can connect as well afterwards. And just wanted to say one more time, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.